Hey guys, what's up? My name is Zach, and today we're going to be doing a 2020 election prediction between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So, most of you know who Joe Biden is. He's the former vice president who served under Barack Obama. He's seen by most as a moderate liberal, and he's currently the most likely choice for the Democrats to pick as a nominee in the year 2020, which is why I do an election prediction with him at least once a month. So, let's get right into it. Let's move into safe toss-up. It's already there. So, Joe Biden, like I said, is seen as the generic candidate for the Democrats to pick, and for good reason, because he has a name recognition and he has the experience, and he does come from the right region. Many people think he'll do very well in the Rust Belt in particular, considering that he is a Rust Belt Democrat. He's from Delaware, but he does have strong ties to Pennsylvania, and that's a state the Democrats need in order to win in 2020. I don't think they'll be able to win, and I don't think there's a single scenario where they can win without Pennsylvania. So that's the main reason, in my opinion, why he's one of the main reasons why he's the best candidate for the Democrats, at least currently, or one of the best. I won't say he's the best. So New Hampshire, I'm going to start out with. I consider that to be likely in Joe Biden's column, and this comes down to the fact that, one, I consider it to be likely in almost any Democrat's column, considering that it's trending more Democrat overall, and the fact that Joe Biden is from the region. I think he can appeal very well to voters, especially Democratic voters up here. And as goes New Hampshire, so does the two electoral votes at large in Maine. Really, you can make the same argument that you would with New Hampshire as you could with the two at-large electoral votes in Maine, which I often do. It's the same demographic makeup, not a whole lot of minorities, but there is a strong Democratic base that Joe Biden can absolutely turn out if he was the candidate for. Virginia, I consider that to be likely in Biden's column. Very strong Democratic base in this state. Maybe won't get too much minority turnout. Many people argue that Joe Biden would get minority turnout because of his ties to the Obama administration, but you could have said the same thing for Hillary Clinton and her ties to the Obama administration. She was the Secretary of State under Barack Obama, and she had virtually no minority turnout, or at least not compared to Barack Obama. So I highly doubt that Biden would get a substantial amount of minority turnout, at least compared to Barack Obama. I mean, and Barack Obama endorsed Hillary Clinton as well. He was out on the campaign field with her. He probably could have been out more often, and who knows how that could have affected the race, but I wouldn't say it would impact the race tremendously. Honestly, and this really comes down to identity politics, and I never agree with identity politics, but it's a factor regardless. Joe Biden is an old white male, and honestly, I don't see a lot of Hispanics or African Americans turning out en masse for Joe Biden as they would for Barack Obama or Julian Castro. So that's my argument when it comes to the minority vote in Joe Biden. Going down to Georgia, dovetailing off of what I just said, really, I don't think any Democrat, black, white, Hispanic, minority, not minority, I don't think the Democrats will be able to pull off a win in Georgia at all. I mean, Cory Booker is African American, and I would never list Georgia in his column. That comes down to the fact that he's a New Jersey Democrat, and New Jersey Democrats do not have good appeal to voters down here. There's really no candidate I think could win Georgia in 2020. The only reason why it's likely is because there's a strong shifting demographic in this state regardless, and I do think it'll go into the Democrats' column come next election cycle, give or take. And then going over to Texas, same arguments. I mean, we're seeing it shift more so, and I think that Beto O'Rourke is a big factor there. He's definitely a big pioneer in making the state go more and more blue, but still strong Republican identity, and definitely not ready to go to the Democrats yet unless there's strong Hispanic appeal or some strong Native appeal like Julian Castro, and neither of those things are the case for Joe Biden, so I would not call this state anything more than likely in his column. New Mexico and Colorado, I'd call both these states likely in Joe Biden's column. Strong Democratic bases in both these states, and you really don't need to have Hispanic turnout in order to make these states go likely in your column if you're a Democrat. The only way that they wouldn't go likely in the Democrats' column is if they're either an awful candidate like Nancy Pelosi, or if it's not Trump who's on the Republican ticket, maybe someone like Marco Rubio, who can turn out Hispanic turnout on the Republican side rather than the Democrats. But neither of those things are the case, so I'd call both these states likely in Joe Biden's column, as I would for almost any other Democrat. Going over to Minnesota, I call this likely in Joe Biden's column. This comes back to his minority appeal. Not his minority appeal, my apologies. His Rust Belt appeal, which is absolutely a factor in a state like Minnesota. And Democrats are becoming more and more solidified in this state overall, especially with the move towards progressivism, because Minnesota is a very progressive state overall, I'd say. And Joe Biden may not be a progressive himself, but still, I'd see this state go more and more likely and more solid for almost any other Democrat, or almost any Democrat in general who would run for president in 2020, just because there's a strong shifting demographic, and combined with Trump's low approval, that's also a factor as well. I'd call the state likely in Joe Biden's column. And going over to Pennsylvania, this is an early call, but it makes sense, which I'll explain in a second. I'd call it likely in Joe Biden's column. And this comes down to the fact that he has very, very strong ties to Pennsylvania, and it's honestly what makes him probably the best candidate, or one of the more primary factors to make him the best candidate for 2020 is his strong Pennsylvania appeal. Because the main reason why Barack Obama, the main reason why Barack Obama did so well in Pennsylvania, both in 2008 and 2012, is because Joe Biden was on his ticket. Joe Biden was able to have very good appeal to the white working class here, both in the urban areas, the suburban areas, and the rural areas alike. Joe Biden has very good appeal to Pennsylvania voters, and I would call it likely in his column for that reason. And Trump's low approval is obviously a factor as well. It's not as low compared to the rest of the Rust Belt, and I think that's a big warning sign for Democrats that they really should put their attention on Pennsylvania, because they need that. They absolutely need it in order to win in 2020, and Joe Biden would have it securely in his column if he was the candidate. So that's, like I said, one of the main reasons what distinguishes him as a 2020 contender for the Democrats. Michigan, I'd also call for Joe Biden, just because of that Rust Belt appeal. Trump's approval has also been consistently low here, just about a few months after his election, or his inauguration rather. It's been consistently low, and I think that Joe Biden would definitely capitalize on that, along with his white working class appeal, which you absolutely need in order to win Michigan as a Democrat. I think that Joe Biden can absolutely drive out voter turnout and put the state pretty likely in his column. Nevada, I call likely in Joe Biden's column. And my last election prediction, I called it leaning in Trump's column, and I think that was because at that point it was very narrow approval for Trump, and I really focused too much on that. This state is trending more Democrat overall. It's really not as competitive as it was in 2016, and the Democratic base here is a lot stronger than I previously thought. So combined with that, combined with the Hispanic appeal, that would turn out pretty much for any Democrat in general. I call it likely in Joe Biden's column, and obviously Trump's approval in the state is also a factor, which has plummeted since I made my last Joe Biden election prediction, and it's at -10 plus, I believe, in Nevada, which is not good for Trump for Nevada. So I'd call this likely in Joe Biden's column, making him 2 electoral votes away from a victory. Now we're going over to leaning states. Wisconsin, I call leaning in Joe Biden's column. Actually, I'm going to call it likely in his column. I previously called it as a leaning state, just because I was really being more generous to Trump. But if we're being honest with ourselves, Biden really has a very secure hold over the Rust Belt in general. In Wisconsin's very, very low approval of Trump, which I think should be a huge warning sign for Trump, considering that the state went pretty solidly in his column. Well, not solidly, obviously the entire Rust Belt was very shaky for Trump in 2016, but it was still a state he secured better than Michigan, and it's seen as more Republican than Michigan, and more Republican than Pennsylvania, and yet his approval in Wisconsin is lower than both Michigan and Pennsylvania, so that should be a big warning sign for Trump. Combined with Biden's pretty high appeal to the suburban white working class voters, and the fact that if we're looking at the 2018 midterms, which I think is a factor regardless, it does look like the state is going to have a Democratic governor. It does look like this Tammy Baldwin's going to be securing her hold in the state from 2018 as well. And I think reflecting on those two things, you can dovetail off of that and infer that Joe Biden would probably hold the state pretty well, given his Rust Belt appeal in general. So now we're going over to leans. Arizona, I call a lean in Trump's column. We're seeing the state trend more Democrat. We're seeing the state become more Democratic friendly. Joe Biden definitely would be able to pull over those moderate Republicans who don't have a very high approval of Trump over to his side. I think that's a big factor for him in the state, which would make it go leaning in Trump's column rather than likely. However, Biden would not have that Hispanic appeal, which I've said before, you need both Hispanic appeal and that moderate Republican appeal in order to win in this state. So, for those reasons, I'd consider it to be leaning in Trump's column. Main second, I consider to be leaning in Trump's column as well. Honestly, Biden could do pretty well in this district, considering his northeastern appeal in general, and the same appeal he would have for the rest of Maine and for New Hampshire. But Trump still has a very firm hold on this district, which I've said repeatedly when talking about this district. And for those reasons, I would list it as leaning in Trump's column. Going to North Carolina, list that as leaning in Trump's column as well. I think that Biden does have a shot at taking this state. We're seeing it trend a bit more Democrat in general, I'd say. Trump's approval has been in flux in this state. I think it's currently at net zero, 50-50 split in North Carolina currently. And I think that Joe Biden can absolutely appeal to those white, suburban, affluent voters, which really make him a good candidate for the Democrats overall. But he would not have that African-American appeal. I think that he would to some degree. I think that he can definitely use his ties to Barack Obama's administration to his advantage, and which is probably the main reason why the state is leaning in his column rather than likely in Trump's column. But still, I don't think it'd be enough to flip the state from red to blue, so I'd call it leaning in Trump's column. Going over to Nebraska's... Oh, I accidentally filled in all of Nebraska, my bad. But Nebraska's second, I would list as leaning... leaning in... I'm on the fence between leaning Biden or leaning Trump. Like I said in the past, individual districts are very hard to call, but I think I'm going to call this district... I'm going to call it leaning in Joe Biden's column. And this comes down to the fact that I do believe that Hillary Clinton had a very good shot at winning this district in 2016. Trump won it by a very slim margin, I think, overall. And I think that Biden, and also Trump's low approval in Nebraska, which I think mainly comes from around Omaha overall, I think that Biden would be able to flip this district from red to blue and win Nebraska's second, which is mainly just the Omaha urban areas of Nebraska. Going over to Ohio, I would call this leaning in Biden's column, and this is mainly because I think that Biden would have very good appeal to the voters in the state, particularly the white, affluent, suburban class voters, which I've said repeatedly. And Trump's approval is very shaky in the state overall, and I think that Biden could very easily have peak turnout in areas like Cincinnati, Columbus, Akron, the places where Hillary really didn't perform as well as she should have, and I think that he'll peak those turnout in those areas and win Ohio. Iowa, I would call leaning in Biden's column as well, and I know that these two states, Iowa and Ohio, I've said in the past that I've thought that they're out of the Democrats' reach, at least for Iowa. I said that I think it's out of the Democrats' reach, but we're seeing a very big shift in these states overall, and I think it's predominantly because of the Trump's economic tariffs, particularly regarding soybeans, and that came out of nowhere, and I didn't predict that to happen, but that's played a very big role in the approval, particularly in Iowa, because those tariffs directly affect Trump's base, and who they affect is the rural farming vote in Iowa, which is really what delivered this state to Trump in 2016, and these tariffs are negatively affecting many of those main voters, and he's really negatively affecting his entire voter base in Iowa and in Ohio as well, but mainly in Iowa. And I think it's going to be a big factor for Trump in 2016 or in 2020. Even if the tariffs aren't a factor, then I think they're going to be a big factor because Iowa voters will not forget how bad the tariffs are affecting them. Prices are being doubled, tripled for soybeans in this state, and it's really affecting those farmers. And I think that come 2020, if that same negative energy is still a factor, this state would go to Biden. I think they can pull that off. And as for Ohio, my logic for that is Biden has very strong appeal to the... I've already went over this, but I'm just reiterating it because this is a very, very big shift from my past election predictions. And I think I can very easily see these two calls changing in particular in the next few months, but for now, this is where it stands. And then going down to Florida, I call this leaning in Trump's column. I know this is a very big shift overall. I'm used to calling Florida for the Democrats and Iowa and Ohio for the Republicans, but Trump has a very solid approval in this state, as we're seeing with the Senate elections. It looks like Rick Scott is favored to win in this state as well, and we're seeing that the blue wave is not having a tremendous effect on Florida overall, even with the shooting, even with the Puerto Rican immigrants coming and settling in Florida. It's not having a tremendous effect on Florida overall, and who knows, maybe we can see a big shift, but for now, Trump's approval holds firm. His base is also very solid in the state, as we've seen with primary turnout for DeSantis in the gubernatorial primary for the Republicans, and I'd call this state leaning in Trump's column. So this is my election prediction. Overall, as you can see, Biden would be a pretty decent candidate for the Democrats, and arguably one of the best candidates for the Democrats, probably one of the top three, I'd say. When it comes down to his Rust Belt appeal, he holds the entire Rust Belt likely in his column, which really puts him over the top and makes this election in general safe in his column. But then you go to places like Iowa and Ohio, which I think Biden can absolutely monopolize on as a result of his appeal to moderate Republicans, which do not have a favorable view of Trump in general, and his approval towards the farmers who are being neglected by the Trump tariffs, which I think he could definitely pull over to his column, making both these states go leaning, and same with Nebraska's second. So, if you guys enjoyed the video, leave a comment down below, like, share, subscribe. It helps my channel grow. And if you guys want to see any videos in particular, leave a comment down below, and I'll put them on my list for video in the future. Hope you guys have a good day. See ya.